The first thing I saw when I pulled into my driveway was a cloud of dust drifting across my lawn. The second thing I saw was a backhoe tearing straight through the flower beds my late wife planted 10 years ago. And standing there, sipping an iced coffee like he was watching a golf tournament instead of destroying somebody else and Oppo's property, was my neighbor, Ethan Calloway. Now look, I'm not the kind of guy who starts trouble with neighbors. I'm 56 years old, I teach history at a community college outside Asheville, North Carolina, and honestly, I like a quiet life. I mow my lawn on Thursdays, I drink cheap beer on the porch on Fridays, and I've lived in that same cedar-sided house for almost 20 years. But Ethan was the exact opposite. He moved into the neighborhood about a year earlier after buying the old Whitmore property at the end of the cul-de-sac, and from the second the moving truck showed up, everybody knew he was going to be that guy. You know the type. Loud without realizing he's loud. Friendly in a way that somehow still feels like bragging. Every conversation turned into a story about venture capital, crypto, private schools, or some luxury resort in Cabo. He drove this matte black Range Rover that looked like it had never touched dirt in its life, wore those tiny expensive sneakers rich guys always wear now, and somehow managed to make carrying groceries look arrogant. At first, people in the neighborhood tried to like him. My next-door neighbor Diane baked him banana bread. Old Mr. Hargrove offered him the number for a local handyman. Ethan barely looked up from his phone during conversations, and after a while, folks stopped trying. Then came the renovations. Dear God, the renovations. For almost 10 straight months, there was always something happening over there. First a pool, then a stone fire pit, then an outdoor kitchen with one of those stainless steel pizza ovens that probably cost more than my first car. Every weekend, there'd be another delivery truck blocking half the street, while Ethan stood outside with his architect talking about expanding the entertainment footprint. I remember saying to Diane one afternoon, at this point he's one infinity pool away from turning the place into a boutique hotel. She laughed, but honestly, it bothered people. Not because he had money, but because he acted like the whole neighborhood was just scenery around his life. Still, none of that was my business until the afternoon I came home and found his contractors standing in my yard. One guy was spray painting orange lines across the side of my property, while another had already dug out nearly 15 feet of dirt along the fence line. My fence line. I got out of the truck and just stood there for a second trying to process what I was looking at because the scene felt so insane my brain almost rejected it. Then I noticed my hydrangeas flattened into the mud like they'd never existed. I walked straight over and asked one of the workers what the hell was going on. The guy looked uncomfortable immediately, pointed toward Ethan, and muttered, "You should probably talk to the homeowner." Homeowner. That word hit me like a slap. Ethan spotted me walking over and gave me this casual little smile, like we were about to discuss barbecue recipes instead of property theft. "Hey, Martin," he said, not even taking his sunglasses off. "Little construction day over here." I looked past him at the framing stakes hammered deep into the ground, deep into my ground. "Your guys are on my property." He actually chuckled. Not according to the updated survey. Then he pulled a folded document out from under his arm and tapped it with 2 fingers like he was presenting evidence in court. Turns out the original property lines were off by a few feet. Happens all the time. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Ethan, that land's been part of my yard since before you were old enough to shave." He shrugged. "Well, now it isn't." And then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Besides, you weren't really doing anything with it anyway." I swear to God, something in me shifted when he said that. It wasn't even about the land anymore. It was the way he said it. Like because I wasn't rich enough to build a luxury patio there, the space somehow mattered less. Like ordinary people only deserve what they actively monetize. I looked over at the crushed flowers, the broken bird bath my wife picked out years ago, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt genuinely angry. Not irritated. Not frustrated. Angry in a way that settles deep in your chest and just sits there, waiting. And standing there in his expensive sunglasses with construction equipment rumbling behind him, Ethan gave me one last smug smile and said, "Don't worry, Martin. Once the patio's finished, it'll look a lot better than those bushes ever did." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing dirt flying through the air and those hydrangeas disappearing under tractor wheels. Maybe that sounds dramatic to some people, but when you've lived somewhere long enough, your home stops being just property. It becomes memory. My wife, Ellen, planted those flowers the summer before she got sick. We used to sit out there in folding chairs drinking sweet tea while cicadas screamed from the trees. So hearing Ethan dismiss it all like some useless patch of dirt, yeah, that stayed with me. Around 2 in the morning I got out of bed, walked downstairs, and pulled the old lockbox from the hall closet where I kept all the paperwork for the house. Deeds, tax records, insurance documents, survey maps, everything. I spread it all across the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and started digging through page after page while rain tapped against the windows. And the more I looked, the less sense Ethan's story made. According to every document I had, the property line hadn't changed in over 30 years. There were old county maps, utility sketches, even handwritten notes from the previous owner. Everything matched. The next morning I drove straight to the county clerk's office carrying a folder so thick it looked like I was preparing for trial. The woman behind the counter, Carla, recognized me immediately because small towns are like that. She glanced through my paperwork, frowned, then pulled up Ethan's revised survey on her computer. Well, she muttered, chewing gum while scrolling. His documents were filed last month. Filed by who? I asked. Survey company out of Charlotte. She turned the monitor slightly toward me. Looks official. I leaned closer and immediately noticed something weird. The updated line wasn't straight. It curved inward near the side yard in this strange little arc that magically gave Ethan exactly enough room for the oversized patio he was building. It looked less like a legitimate correction and more like somebody trying to squeeze furniture into a room that didn't fit. Carla gave me an apologetic look. You can dispute it, Martin, but these things take time. Time. That was the problem. Every hour that passed meant more concrete getting poured into my yard. When I got home later that afternoon, the patio foundation had doubled in size. Workers were carrying stone slabs through what used to be my garden while music blasted from a portable speaker. Ethan spotted me from across the yard and actually waved. Looking good, right? He shouted over the noise. I ignored him and walked inside before I said something that'd land me in jail. That evening Diane came over with a casserole because apparently my misery had become visible from the street. She sat at my kitchen table while I vented for almost an hour. At one point she quietly said, "You know, my husband used to say people like Ethan only understand consequences." That line stuck with me. Consequences. Around 9 o'clock, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. My uncle Walter. Walter sold me this house after retiring from the city planning department back in the 90s, and the man never threw away a single document in his life. Blueprints, permits, zoning maps. He kept boxes of old records stacked in the attic like historical artifacts. Most of it was probably useless, but honestly, I was desperate enough to look. So I climbed up into the attic with a flashlight and started opening dusty cardboard boxes while insulation drifted through the air like snow. For nearly an hour, I found nothing but old tax receipts and faded neighborhood plans. Then I opened a long flat tube tucked behind an air vent. Inside was a full original infrastructure map for the entire subdivision dated 1987. Water lines, gas lines, sewer access, easements. Every inch of underground utility placement carefully marked in red and blue ink. I rolled the map across the attic floor and froze. Because running directly beneath the strip of land Ethan had stolen was the city's primary sewer access line. Not near it, not adjacent to it, directly under it. My heart started pounding so hard I could actually hear it. See, most people don't know what an easement is, but cities take them incredibly seriously. That land technically still belongs to the homeowner, but utility crews must have unrestricted access to it at all times, which means you cannot build permanent structures over it. No foundations, no concrete slabs, no luxury patios with built-in fireplaces and wine coolers. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked together in my head at once. Ethan's fancy revised survey probably fooled the county clerk because property disputes happen all the time, but whoever approved his plans either never checked the easement records or assumed nobody else would. I sat there in that dusty attic staring at the map for a long time. And I'm going to be honest with you, for the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge exactly, but because I finally realized something important. Ethan thought this fight was about money. He assumed if he hired expensive enough people and acted confident enough, regular folks would eventually back down. And maybe most of the time they did. But he made one massive mistake. He underestimated how much history an old house can hold. The next morning, I went into full detective mode. I dug up the original steel survey pin near the back corner of my property, measured every inch from the old marker to Ethan's new patio framing, and photographed everything from 6 different angles. Then I scanned Walter's easement maps into my computer, highlighted the utility corridor, and printed copies for every department I could think of. City utilities, zoning enforcement, public works, even the emergency sewer maintenance office. By Friday afternoon, I'd left so many voicemails I probably sounded insane. Ethan, meanwhile, was hosting a cocktail party beside the half-finished patio like none of this mattered. I watched people laugh around portable heaters while servers carried trays of shrimp and champagne through my stolen yard. At one point, Ethan raised a glass toward me from across the fence with this smug little grin that practically said, "You lost." What he didn't know was that Monday morning at exactly 8:13 a.m., 3 White County trucks pulled into our cul-de-sac, and everything changed. I was standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee when the first truck rolled up, and I gotta tell you, I have never seen a man's confidence evaporate faster than Ethan Calloway's did that morning. At first, he walked outside smiling like he thought the city had come to admire his backyard renovation. Then a second truck pulled in behind the first. Then a third. One said public utilities. Another said zoning enforcement. The last one had county infrastructure services printed across the side in giant blue letters. By the time 2 inspectors started unloading tripods and measuring equipment, Ethan's smile was completely gone. I stepped out onto my porch just as one of the inspectors introduced himself and asked Ethan a very simple question. "Sir, did you receive authorization to build over a protected municipal easement?" Ethan blinked a couple times like his brain needed to reboot. "I what?" The inspector opened a folder, pulled out one of the maps I'd submitted, and pointed directly at the patio foundation. "This entire section sits over an active sewer access corridor." Ethan immediately launched into corporate lawyer mode. "There must be some misunderstanding. My survey team cleared this." The inspector didn't even react. "Your survey team does not supersede city infrastructure maps." Oof. Even from 30 feet away, that one hurt. Over the next hour, the inspectors crawled all over Ethan's property, measuring distances, checking permits, marking sections of concrete with fluorescent paint. And the deeper they looked, the worse it got. Turns out the patio wasn't the only problem. Part of the new pool deck crossed into the easement too. So did the gas line feeding his outdoor kitchen. One inspector actually shook his head and muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath while reviewing the plans. At around 10:30, they officially posted a bright red stop work order on Ethan's back door. Construction halted immediately. The music shut off. Contractors started packing equipment into trucks without even making eye contact. And Ethan completely lost it. He cornered one of the inspectors near the driveway and started demanding names, threatening lawsuits, insisting somebody was making a mistake. I'll never forget the moment the inspector finally cut him off and said, "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation. If there's an emergency sewer failure under this structure, the city has legal authority to tear through your patio without compensation." Silence. Total silence. Even the contractors stopped moving for a second. Ethan looked like somebody had punched him in the chest. Over the next few weeks, things spiraled fast. The city ordered immediate demolition of the entire patio structure along with major sections of the pool surround and outdoor kitchen. Because utilities needed unrestricted access, everything built over the easement had to go. And since Ethan had already poured custom foundations and installed high-end stonework, demolition alone cost an absolute fortune. Rumor around the neighborhood was somewhere close to 400 grand by the time engineers, contractors, and legal fees piled up. Then the HOA jumped in. Apparently, Ethan never got final approval for several modifications because he assumed nobody in the neighborhood would challenge him. Big mistake. They started fining him weekly. Suddenly, the same neighbors he'd spent a year ignoring were attending HOA meetings just to watch him argue with the board. Diane actually leaned over to me during one meeting and whispered, "This is better than Netflix." And honestly, she wasn't wrong. But somewhere in the middle of all this, something unexpected happened. One evening, Ethan knocked on my front door. No sunglasses, no designer jacket, no smug grin, just exhaustion. He looked older somehow, like stress had physically aged him in a month. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I almost said no. Part of me wanted him to sit in the mess he created. But another part of me remembered what my wife used to say about anger. That if you hold on to it too long, eventually it starts eating you too. So I invited him in. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd spent nights digging through paperwork, and for the first time since he moved in, Ethan actually sounded human. He admitted the truth almost immediately. The revised survey wasn't technically fake, but he'd hired a consultant known for aggressive interpretations of property boundaries. He figured if construction moved quickly enough, nobody would challenge it before the project was finished. And honestly, he expected me to roll over because I was just some older guy living alone. Hearing him say that stung more than I expected, not because it was insulting, but because he genuinely didn't realize how awful it sounded until the words were already out there. After a long silence, he finally looked at me and said, I really did think money could smooth this over. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, Ethan. People who've always had money start believing consequences are optional. He didn't argue with me after that. A couple months later, the house went up for sale. Ethan ended up taking a massive loss just to get out from under the repairs and fines. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona for some new tech startup deal. The developer who bought the property ripped out half the backyard and rebuilt everything legally. As for my side yard, the city eventually installed permanent steel boundary markers after re-verifying the original survey lines. My hydrangeas are growing back now. Not all of them made it, but enough did. Sometimes I sit out there in the evenings with a beer and think about how strange the whole thing was. Because in the end, this story was never really about land. It was about respect, about the kind of people who think ownership means power, and the kind of people who understand ownership also means responsibility. And I'll be honest, part of me still wonders what would have happened if I never found those old maps in the attic. Would Ethan have gotten away with it? Would the city have ignored me long enough for the damage to become permanent? I don't know. But I do know this. Some people mistake kindness for weakness right up until the moment reality introduces itself. So now I want to hear from you. If your neighbor stole part of your property and acted like money made him untouchable, would you have fought back the same way I did, or would you have handled it differently? And be honest, because after everything that happened, I still can't decide whether what I did was justice or revenge.